Yeah, right. Okay. Well, Katie, glad to see you joined with us. We have your friend Jenny with us today,
Yeah, I've seen Penny. I've been here.
or Penny. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. And
What's that, Kenny?
Kenny.
yeah, it's Penny. I called her Jenny. Okay. Okay. Any comments on the meditation? Anybody feel anything unusual? Okay. We hope you enjoyed it. I never have anything planned for the meditation. I just kind of go by what comes to me. And usually we come up with something interesting. Okay, we'll start off with our with white magic here. We're on rule number 11. 3 things a worker with law must now accomplish. First, ascertain the formula which will confine the lives within the ensphering wall. Can anyone remember what that is about? Maybe not, but it's basically, it's quite esoteric language. It's basically to not scatter your energies. When you're creating something, you don't scatter your energies, but you have to, but all creations are composed of numerous smaller lives that are subservient to the creator, and he must not scatter his energies but confine his energies and the lives he's working with within the confines that will serve the creation. That's basically what this means. Second, he must pronounce the words which will tell them what to do and where to carry that which has been made. So he's got to come up with a formula. How am I going to make this idea actually materialize? So he's going to have to come up with the right words that will tell the creation how to manifest so it can manifest correctly. If he doesn't come up with the right words, with the right directions, he'll have some type of creation, but it won't be very beneficial. It will wind up being a failure of some kind. So he's got to come up with the right formula. And finally, utter forth the mystic phrase, which will save him from the work, and we haven't got into that part yet. We just left off talking about the 5 stages of evolution that humanity goes through. And he says every form is built by an impulsive spark of life emanated by a creator and growing stage by stage under the law of accretion, an aspect of the law of attraction, which is the law of life. So every form, he says, is built by a spark of life. So if you see just a rock laying on your driveway, that rock has in its center somewhere a spark of life. Now, its spark of life is at a lower level than, say, a plant or an animal or a human, but it's still a spark. You look through the Hubble telescope or take a picture of us from a spacecraft of a dead-looking asteroid or a moon of Saturn or something like that that looks really dead. Well, really, it's a body that has a lot of life in it, a lot more than we think. Some of these planets that look really dead have stuff inside of them and life inside of them that's completely unknown to us. Some of them have teeming oceans underneath a big layer of ice. And in the oceans, science thinks there may be life, and I think they think accurately that there is elementary life down there. Now, eventually, we as humans will evolve the technology to be able to move moons and planets into more friendly orbits where they can get more radiation from the sun, and we'll actually be able to terraform planets. The first planet we plan on terraforming will be Mars. There's plans to eventually to go to Mars and release all kinds of oxygen there, so that we can eventually build an atmosphere and colonize Mars. And the first step is to go to the moon, and the polar ice cap there in the moon, or polar North Pole in the moon, has actually a layer of ice there where they think they can build a base and have water available. And so they've got interesting plans now, but the plans will change and evolve in the future beyond anything that people imagine now.
Arnold Schwarzenegger already terraformed Mars. I saw the movie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was a pretty good movie, actually. But so we're going to be doing some fantastic things. Just think, when the Tibetan wrote this book in the early 30s, he was talking about how great the technology of radio was. Just imagine what he'd say today with what we have available. It's pretty fantastic. Now try to picture yourself 100 years from now, if we don't blow ourselves up first and if we continue to progress. There will be innovations that people haven't even thought about yet. Hardly anybody thought we'd have something like the internet 50 years ago. And I remember when the internet first came online, I thought, well, what is this? Why is this desirable even? Email's pretty good. How's this better than email? It took me a while to grasp the vision of the internet. And the same thing with what's coming around the bend for us. We're going to have some fantastic things, and we're going to develop abilities to do things that would boggle our minds if we could see it. And what's interesting is things are going to manifest that nobody predicted. Just like nobody really predicted the internet. I mean, somebody might have predicted something a little bit like it, but nobody predicted it very specifically. And this is an interesting part, is people who make all kinds of predictions, and I love at the first of the year, all these psychics are making all kinds of predictions, and I read quite a few of them, and most of them don't come true. Most of them are quite off. Every once in a while, somebody hits it on. But the things that are really significant, it seems like everybody always misses. And now, after like 9/11, for instance, afterwards, a bunch of people claim they predicted it. But if you go back and read their actual prediction word for word, it was real fuzzy, So the significant things that do happen are usually beyond the predictive powers of anybody but maybe a master.
Remember Sharon sort of predicted Hurricane Katrina? That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, she predicted a hurricane hitting there in New Orleans, but she got the date off, but she was close enough. I thought, boy, she ought to take credit for that. But then it turned out, she says, no, the real one hasn't come yet. So I thought she should have just taken credit for that and left well enough alone. But she predicted another big one that still hasn't come yet. But yeah, they're still in danger there, actually. Okay, cause, attraction, or desire, accretion, and effect. These four words govern the construction of any thought form. Cause, attraction, or desire, accretion, and effect. Okay, so first of all, you have to have the cause, then basically the idea. Then you have to have the attraction or desire. You have to gather the materials, and then you have the final effect. All forms represent some purpose, which will give us the key to the Creator's purpose. That purpose is encapsulated in the words of the rule. Pronounce the words which will tell them what to do and where to carry that which has been made. So this interesting statement, he says, the forms represent the Creator's purpose. So if you look at a form, you get an idea, it can give you an idea of the purpose of the Creator. Now, so let's look at the human form, for instance. The human form is an interesting form. So in other words, if you examine the human form, it gives you all kinds of clues because it's extremely complex. The eyes, the nose, the mouth, the arms, the legs, the fact that we stand on 2 feet instead of 4. All these things give hints and are symbols of the Creator's purpose that manifested our physical form. If you look at a car, it gives you an idea of what the purpose is. Well, the car takes you places, one place to another. So this was obviously the creator of this car designed it to take you from one place to another in as much comfort as possible. So by looking at a creation, you can get an idea of what is in the mind of the creator. And it's pretty easy to do with us humans, the things that us humans create, but look at beyond human, like the human form, the form of planets, solar system, the galaxies. They all give clues as to what's happening in the divine mind. Thus, he says, we find the idea of purpose, activity, and the goal. With the goal, religion has long sought to deal. With the activity aspect, the scientists are now attempting to deal. And with the will of God, the most advanced thinkers and philosophers are constantly speculating. So yeah, religion deals with the goal, and scientists is attempting to deal with the activity aspect. They look at what's happening and they say, well, why is this happening? And they formulate laws as to what governs things. Where the scientists miss out is they don't look at beyond the activity. They say, well, this has happened because this happened previously, but they leave the creator out of it. They say, well, that which happened previously, what caused that to happen? Okay, well, the whole universe exists because of the Big Bang. Okay, they look at the activity and it looks like all the stars are moving away from each other, and they go back 13 billion years, and everything, according to math, originated at a point. So they say, well, we all exist because there was a Big Bang that began at a point. Okay, well, that's what your math shows, but what caused the Big Bang? What was before the Big Bang? And what existed then? What brought everything into existence? Well, we don't know. We'll find out, you know. And they can only go so far with that observation. The advanced thinkers are thinking about the will of God, he says, but many of them are not so much believers themselves, but they think about the why of things. Why are things the way they are? And they are exploring the subconscious, the power that people have to create beyond the norm and everything like this. So we're all exploring these things, and we're all getting a little closer to the truth all the time. To understand the purpose of a creation, the disciple must submit to the will of the higher self and control the lives in the form nature. So you can only get so far until you submit to a will higher than yourself, until you recognize something higher than yourself. Until a person recognizes something higher than himself, he only goes so far. Now, science is kind of funny. The great scientists are like Newton, Tesla, Einstein, Edison. All of these guys recognized there was some higher intelligence up there. They all had, most of them didn't go along with regular religion, but they all recognized there was a higher intelligence. Now, a lot of the scientists today, instead of getting closer to spirit, they're more atheistic. And nobody's standing out like a Tesla or Edison or Einstein. They're all just in the same category. Nobody's making big inroads in thought. And the reason why, I think, is because none of them can see that there's higher intelligence. And he says here, to understand creation, we have to submit ourselves to the higher intelligence. And I found it interesting with both, for instance, Newton and Tesla. Both of them said that they had read the scriptures and they got a lot of their scientific ideas by meditating on scripture. And so I found that quite fascinating. Newton, he only spent he's recognized as the greatest scientist of all time, yet he only spent a third of his time on regular science. We have other scientists that are trying to be great. They spend almost 100% of their time on science. What other 2/3 of his time did he spend? What did he spend the majority of his time on besides regular science? Anybody know?
Alchemy?
Right. He spent about a third of his time on alchemy. And what did he spend the other third of his time on?
Billiards.
Philosophy.
Well, kind of. What kind of philosophy? Out of what book?
He didn't tell me.
Yeah. It was the Bible. And he was particularly interested in the second coming of Christ. And he studied Daniel and the book of Revelations, trying to figure out when the second coming of Christ would occur. And his religious thoughts were contrary to the norm, so he didn't tell anybody about them. And all his writings about his thoughts on religion were hidden, and nobody even knew anything about him. I think it was in the 1930s they discovered a box that contained all his writings, and they were auctioned off. And so nobody even knew that Newton was particularly religious for many years, because if the church would have found out some of his religious thinking, they probably would have had him executed as a heretic. So he had to be very careful about letting people know that. He also had to be careful about alchemy, because that wasn't really that was kind of frowned on by the religious authorities. So about 2/3 of his life efforts he had to do pretty much in secret. And he probably got some mercury poisoning from all the alchemy he did, and that if he hadn't got that mercury poisoning, he probably would have excelled even more, because that kind of destroys the mind somewhat. So it's an interesting story with Newton. But he submitted himself to higher will, and look at all the things he was able to come up with. Amazing guy. I heard a story about him that there was some publication that they were putting a mathematical puzzle that was supposed to be almost impossible to solve, and they for about a month after it was out, all the scientists were trying to solve it. Nobody could, and somebody nudged Newton, you need to look at this. He hadn't even looked at it yet. He looked at it and he solved it in about a half hour and sent it in. And that's how intelligent the guy was. He was a really smart guy. Okay, with the, he says, we as creators must, he says, first of all, learn to build intelligently. Second, use right speech to guide the creation. He says, send out the thought form correctly orientated toward his goal, so truly directed that it will reach the objective and accomplish the sender's purpose. So that's kind of repeating what he's, the essence of the rule there. He says we must eliminate destructive and idle thoughts. He must differentiate his thought from the mass thought. And this is something that he says a lot of teachers and people are coming to realize the essence of this rule. And this has been emphasized by a lot of self-improvement gurus. They say, be careful what you say. For instance, don't say, oh, I'm a terrible person, because your subconscious mind registers that. So if you say something over and over is kind of what they're saying, that your subconscious mind enters that in and figures that this is what you want, so it tries to create your reality around what you've told it. So the thinking is be careful what you say. If you're not feeling good, you don't say I am sick, because your subconscious mind gets that and it reinforces the sickness. So focus more on wellness. If you're not feeling good, focus on being well rather than sick. So say the right words to program your subconscious mind. Now, some people go overboard and want you to say things to your subconscious that are just removed from reality, like I'm going to be a millionaire tomorrow. And that's something that's probably not going to happen. So you need to program your subconscious mind with steps that are within the realm of reality. But the important thing is to not say negative things like my
back is killing me.
Yeah, that's a really good example, Curtis. My back is killing me. Well, if you say that soon enough, your subconscious mind will say, well, for some odd reason, this guy, my creator wants his back to kill him, so I guess I'll comply and make his back worse. So, so it's important. It's important that we supply the right words to our creation, and the most important creation for all of us in this physical reality is our physical bodies that we're living in. So we want to keep them in as good a shape as possible. So say positive words in relation to the health of your body. So
another good reason for staying positive, your mind is dealing with not words, but it's dealing with the pictures that the words paint, because mind's a very visual thing. And the word no and the word not, there is no picture for that. So when your mind gets a do not, the only thing that registers in the mind is the do part. It's like do not screw up. Your consciousness is going to say, he wants me to screw up. He said do screw up. Because it's like a blank in the line, and the brain just fills, just scoots past it. Well, at least says do this. When you say do not do this, he still reads to the consciousness, do it.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that before, but it sounds like it could really be something to it, Rick. Interesting.
Yeah.
So another thing about the subconscious mind is it doesn't have any reasoning power. It just takes things completely black and white. So if you say something that you interpret to be positive, but the black and white version is negative, the subconscious will see it as negative. It will see it exactly the way that you say it. So this is why you have to be very careful about your wording, about programming your own mind.
Your subconscious mind and your body and all of your vehicles are composed of elemental essences and Davic substance, which only acts on will.
Yeah.
And it follows your word. In the beginning is the word.
Right. Right. And the subconscious mind is totally different than your higher self. Your higher self is capable of reasoning and understanding, but your subconscious mind is kind of like a computer program that what you put in is what comes out, pretty much. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now he says, as a seeker evolves, his power of thought increases to either accomplish good or evil. So as we learn all the rules of creation, we become a center of power for good or evil. And nobody wants to be evil, but circumstances can trick us into doing the wrong thing and thinking the wrong things, thinking that it's like Isaiah said, that people are mixed up as to what good and evil is people think that that which is good is evil, and people think that which is evil is good. And we see this in politics a lot. People are one person calls one thing good and the other person calls that same thing evil. So what is the real good and what is the real evil? That's really difficult for people to figure out. And this is the important thing for this disciple, to be able to see what the true good and what the true evil is. And the dividing point is always one thing. It always is based on freedom and liberation. That which moves us quickest toward freedom and liberation is the good, and that which takes us away from it and imprisons the soul is the evil. The trouble is that which imprisons the soul is seen as good for many, especially if a person sees something that maybe benefits him, but 9/10 of the people around him it doesn't benefit. Well, he'll think it's good because it benefits him. But if it doesn't benefit the maximum number, then that's not the true good, even though it's good for you. Like the slave owners of the Old South, they thought slavery is good because it benefited them. They said, well, if we didn't have slaves, we wouldn't be able to have the quality of life we have right now. The slaves help us with our quality of life. The same thing in the Roman Empire. They say we couldn't have built this great Roman Empire without all these slaves. So slavery is good, okay, but wasn't good for the whole. Wasn't good for the slaves.
Good for the slaves, that's for sure.
Yeah. So people are that way today. Is that if their idea enslaves a bunch of people and benefits them, well, they think it's good. Well, this idea of good just because it benefits you has to be eliminated. We need to be thinking of wholeness or on the path, and that takes you on the true path of holiness. Okay, any comment on that before we move on here? He gives us rules here that aid us in avoiding the dark creations that imprison the form. He says some of these may seem simple, but they are of great importance. And he talks about this quite often, that, you know, he's complex enough, but when he decides to talk in simplicity, he says, this seems simple. Now, don't think because it seems simple that you can just brush it aside. He says some of the most profound things in the teachings of the ancient wisdom are the simplest. Okay, number one, rules in avoiding dark creations that imprison the form. One, view the world of thought and separate the false out of the true. Yeah, that seems pretty simple, but is it? Is it pretty hard to separate the false? Well, we see how difficult it is with the political world today. We have two completely different ideas of what's false and what's true. And then when somebody says something, it's often reported completely different than the guy said it. So what I do when I see this politician said something that sounds really screwy and they don't give quotes, I look up and see what he actually did say. And it's often a lot different than the article which said he said this, and then they put it in their own words. So what the guy actually said, that's what you want to find, is what the guy actually said. And a lot of people just aren't concerned about finding the truth. They just hear something and they go along with it without researching what really happened. If it goes along with their bias, they think, well, that's fine. That must be the way it is. So the first rule, he says, to avoid the dark path is to separate the false from the true. And the first thing to do in separating the false from the truth is make a commitment to yourself to do that. Because a lot of people just haven't even registered within themselves, oh, I have to find out what's true. They don't even think of that. Instead, when they hear something from an authority that they recognize, they don't even ask. They don't even ask, well, is this really true, what I just heard? Okay, the second thing, he says, learn the meaning of illusion, and in its midst, locate the golden thread of truth. Okay, who can tell us what illusion is? What is an illusion? According to
Well, it's not seeing clearly or seeing incorrectly is illusion. The definition, I would think, is to see
right.
it.
Okay, can someone give us an example of, can somebody give us an example of some type of thinking that has illusion in it?
Well, isn't basically everything that's material is illusionary?
Well, that's true. But in this dream of the soul we're in, it's real to us. But in this reality that we're in, let's take this for instance. The Catholics believe that when you take the Eucharist and you take it in your body, it actually turns into the blood and flesh of Jesus. So you're taking in the actual blood and flesh of Jesus. Would you say this is an illusion?
It's an
Well, the
illusion.
idea behind it is an illusion.
It's an illusion, but it should be symbolic.
Right, it's symbolic, but a lot. The basic teaching is that it's real. It's beyond symbolic. It really, I don't think a lot of Catholics believe that anymore. But when I was young, they believed it was actual real, and so that would be an example of an illusion.
How about my church is superior to yours? My God is bigger than your God. That's an idea. A false idea is an illusion.
Yeah. So to find the illusion in that, you have to find out really, well, why does the guy think this? And so there's some illusion in his thought that gives him this feeling of superiority. Like his God's better than somebody else's God. Now, God may be known by all kinds of different names, but we're all under the same God. And this is what's kind of overlooked. Okay.
Well, doesn't that go into a glamour? Then you can move from illusion to a glamour.
Yeah, glamour is where the ego is fed.
Right. My God's bigger than your God. I'm bigger than you. I'm better than you. That feeds my ego.
Yeah. Or I have a really special purpose in life beyond that of anybody that's ever been born, type of thing. A lot of people have that idea that they are much more unique than they are. And he says the Tibetan emphasizes we need to all see ourselves pretty much in the same boat in a lot of ways. We may be different places on the path, but we're on the same path. Third, he says the disciple must learn to control emotion. Now, that's a really simple decrease. Like he says, this is very simple but complicated. So it's very simple to say, hey, control your emotion. Now, when your spouse gets out of control and you just tell him or her to settle down, how is that usually taken? Let me see, who's a good married person here? We pick on Curtis a lot. Juan, how about you, Juan? If you tell Eva to just settle down, does that go over very good?
He's muted.
Yeah, let me unmute him here. Well, I click on. Huh. Well. Yeah, unmute yourself there, Juan.
Okay.
Now I can hear you. Okay. Now, if you tell your wife when she gets upset just to settle down, does that kind of work or not?
Oh, sometimes yes. Sometimes it's very hard. You know? It's a very difficult. You know.
Yeah.
But usually it's you know, we kind of like try to settle things. We not really argue and stuff. So
yeah.
But
now when she gets upset, what's the best thing that you can do to kind of smooth things over? What do you find?
I just tell him, look in the mirror. What do you want to do? This is what you see in me. Those are the lessons you need to work for yourself.
This is very slippery. This is very slippery territory, you know.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I find with my wife, if I tell her to just settle down and think logically, it just doesn't work at all. But I find what she really wants is she wants to be listened to. Isn't that right, Eva? Yeah,
That's right.
you want to be listened to. And so I find that works better than anything. And it's just, I've been through a lot of distress to figure that out myself. Finally got it figured out most of the time anyway. And so, yeah, the female likes to be listened to. The guy, on the other hand, when there's a problem, he likes to just figure out a solution. And when it's a guy with a guy, the guy says, well, here's a solution, it's ABC, and that's cool. But male-female conversation is a lot different. With the females, the main thing the female wants is they want to be heard and understood more than solving the problem. Because when they're heard and understood, then they forget about the problem. So the problem disappears without even solving it. So it's interesting. And they talk about the female mystique, and you know, the interesting thing about female energy, it's invisible. Like gravity is connected to the female energy and sunlight is connected to the male energy. We can see the sun, that's really obvious. But gravity is just as important, but we can't see it, as mysterious. And you know, about the same time that Newton started understanding gravity and coming up with the laws of gravity, we began to understand females a little bit better. And the female energy is now being understood more as we look toward the invisible. So they talk about the female mystique, and the female energy is very difficult for the male to understand and comprehend. And so solving a problem with a female using female energy is a lot different than solving a problem with male energy. And so it's an interesting thing to contemplate on. If I was to ever be a comic, I'd talk about the difference between males and females, because there's a lot of good comedy that could be built around that, and has been done in the past, but now we're being so politically correct that it's almost difficult to talk about, but it's something that we need to think on, because the two energies, the male, female, positive, negative, has built the whole universe. And the whole universe is built with just these two energies. Okay, well, thanks for your participation there. And any other comment on male-female energies?
I want to see that comedy bit of yours at the gathering, JJ.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can just upload it to YouTube instead of one of the classes only.
Yeah, I make light of it every now and then. It's kind of, yeah, I could probably make a really good comedy routine about it. Like, well, just for instance, one of the big differences between males and females is, for some reason, females use about 20 times the amount of tissues that males do. I mean, one box of Kleenex will last me about a year, but every female I've ever known, they go through a box about every 2 days, you know. And I think, what do they do with all these tissues? You know, how do they use that many of them? It's just one thing. Another kind of funny thing is the time in the bathroom with the male compared to the female. We just go in and out. Females go in. Sometimes they'll spend a half hour there, and you wonder, well, what are they doing in there all this time? So anyway, if I was to do a comedy routine, I mean, there's a lot of material of the differences between male and female, and the idea that males and females are just different because of environment that's just out the window. I mean, we have a different energy about us. We focus on two different directions. But the good news is we complement each other, and we're not complete without both energies. And each one of us, of course, have both energies within us. If you're in a male body, generally you'll have more male energy than female. If you're in a female body, you'll have more female energy than male. But all the two energies are always at play, whether you're single or with somebody. Okay. The fourth, he says, is discover that thou hast a mind and learn its dual use. That's a funny way to word it. Are there people out there that haven't discovered yet that they have a mind? What do you think? Let's see. I bet somebody has a comment on that.
It's like a fish hasn't discovered water.
Yeah, a little bit like that. What does he mean? What happens when the person discovers he has a mind? What's the difference between somebody that's discovered they have a mind and somebody that hasn't discovered it yet?
The one with the mind thinks for himself. He learns to think and reason for himself. It's not a puppet.
Right. So if you haven't discovered your mind, it means you've taken in stuff that's been taught you, and you just go by what you've been taught, and you haven't thought outside of what you've been taught, because you're like a computer program. A computer program can only give you what is put into it. And so those without a mind are like computer programs running around, and they respond according to the input. When you discover you have a mind, you discover, hey, I don't necessarily have to believe or do it this way just because somebody says this is the way it's to be done. It might be another way. What would that other way be? And this, when you start asking questions like this, you discover you have a mind. You have two things. You have the brain, which is like your computer program, and then the mind, which is beyond the brain, which can reason and think creatively and come up with conclusions beyond what is in the program. And so discovering you have a mind is an important point. And if you don't discover you have a mind, he says, then you're in danger of the dark side, because the dark side controls people that are mindless. They are experts at programming the rank and file to do their will. And to escape the power of the beast, you have to discover you have a mind and learn its dual use. What is the dual use of the mind? Could be a number of things, but he doesn't really explain what the dual use is. But one is to think out of the box, and the other is to link perhaps to the soul, because you link to the soul through the mind. Okay, any other comments on that before we move on there?
JJ, I don't remember it totally clearly, but I think in another place, maybe not even in that same book, he says something like, there's the thought form building aspect of the mind, and then there's sort of like you said, the receptive aspect of the mind to impressions or to maybe higher things or the higher mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, it could have several applications depending on what he was thinking when he said this. Okay, 5, concentrate the thinking principle and be the master of thy mental world. It's a weird wording, concentrate the thinking principle. Okay, the thinking principle. What do you think the thinking principle is? What is that? It's kind of what we were talking about with when you discover you have a mind, you discover the thinking principle, that you can think beyond, say you're in a church, the church teaches elements of salvation, so you think, well, is this all there is to it? Do I just need to believe in Jesus and be saved? Is there more to that I'm supposed to do or be thinking about? So you think beyond what you've been programmed. So I would guess that's what he means by the thinking principle. And be master of thy mental world. Now, many people are not masters of their mental world. The other people are masters of them. When you allow someone else to take the place of the inner God and program you, tell you what is real because they are an authority, then you are not master of your mental world. Your master of your mental world is when you take the information that comes from the outside and you run it through your mind and reasoning and your soul, and you conclude whether or not it's true by your own thought rather than someone else's thought. Learn that the thinker and his thought, and that which is the means of thought, are diverse in their nature, yet one and ultimate reality. Okay. So the thinker and the thought, which is a means of thought, are diverse in their nature, but one and the ultimate reality. So in the end, your thought is the connecting link to your soul. And before you make a true soul connection, you have many diverse thoughts, many diverse beliefs. But thought takes you to the soul, which eventually reaches the conclusion that thinkers through the soul are one in the ultimate reality. Then he says, act as the thinker and learn it is not right to prostitute thy thought to the base use of separative desire. Okay, act as a thinker. This is one of the things that the self-improvement gurus teach. They say, well, if you want to be successful, act like you're successful. And if you act like you're successful, you're much more likely to be successful. You will attract successful people around you, and you will make much more advance. So he says, act as the thinker. So instead of just acting like you're some sponge that believes everything the authorities of the world tell you, act like you're Sir Isaac Newton, or act like you're a Shakespeare, or act like you're a Christ or an apostle. put yourself in the position of the great thinkers of the past and act like them in your mind, and then you can be more like them. Isn't that right, Curtis?
I said, right on, brother, right on. It's like Ed always says, energy follows thought, and we are the thought forms of God given to free thought. That's what makes the world go round.
Yeah, and he says, don't prostitute your thought to your base desires. Okay, so that's goes without saying, but in other words, we learn we're thinkers. We learn that we can take our thought and manifest wonderful things. So the first thing a lot of people think, well, I want to make more money and have a bigger house and bigger car and all this. In other words, put your thought towards service of humanity. Well, I have this thinking ability, this ability I'm developing, and I want to use it to benefit my brothers and sisters. This is the attitude the true thinker needs to have to stay on the right-hand path.
I had an acquaintance that a number of months back had a stroke, and after that, apparently she wasn't accomplished in being in her mind. She was too much in the brain, and when the brain had a stroke, it was like she went over to the dark side and everything else.
Yeah, I read about this guy. They had a nail in through his head, and it just altered his personality entirely after they took the nail out. So the brain does have an effect on us.
That's kind of like losing your marbles.
Yeah, right. Okay, we're near the end of our class here. Any comments or questions before we close up here?
Oh, we have surrounding this planet, there's what's called the Sea of Mental Garbage, and also the Ocean of Love Intelligence. And it's by our tuning of our brain to which of those influences we fill our mind with. We have a horizontal focus and we have a vertical focus. And when we develop the vertical focus, it's called building the Antakarana in the esoteric teaching. And I think the goal for us is to build that Antakarana so that we have intuition, we have pure reason. And from there, we look at the world and we see it as it is.
Yeah, we need to connect the higher and lower selves, that's for sure, so that we can stay on the right-hand path. Yeah, staying on the right-hand path is important. We make the DK tells us we make a lot of mistakes and we're pawns for the left-hand path off and on as we progress along. None of us are perfect. And we've actually been of use to the servants of the left-hand path at different times in our past. But now we're in our present, we're beginning to understand the difference between the two paths. So it's important that we understand clear enough that all of our actions are dedicated to the light rather than the dark, to the whole rather than the part.
That's where a choice confronts the one who meditates.
Right. Two paths face the solar angel.
Two paths face the solar angel.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Choose wisely.
Yeah. Choose wisely.
I choose to meet you Wednesday for lunch, Ed.
Yeah, Curtis and Ed just live a couple miles apart. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, he's been over a couple times.
Yeah.